name's James Costello. I'm an English teacher at INTO Newcastle. So I think in terms of academic performance, my Chinese students are generally quite hard working. So they work hard. One of the issues that we do have, if I have like a big group of Chinese students, they are less forthcoming in terms of wanting to control what's happening in the classroom. So if you ask the class like a question about something academic, unless you say, what do you think, nobody answers. So if you ask an open question, and that was something which I found kind of unusual when I first started teaching Chinese students, that they have good knowledge, but they're not very open in terms of sharing it, and I think that might just be a cultural thing. So when I've talked to my students in the past, they've said that quite often when they go through secondary school, they have quite large classes with lots of students, so it's not normal for them to kind of stand up and give their answers because there may be 60, 70 people in a classroom. So I think academically, I don't think that there's a massive difference in terms of academic intelligence. I think it's slightly different in the way that is explained or displayed. So yeah, I don't think there's a huge difference in terms of academic intelligence, but maybe less confident in giving forward their ideas in front of big groups of people. The weakness, I would say, it's not a weakness. It's probably the skill that they use the least would be speaking. So here we have a culture of kind of discussing things. We find that talking through things at length with people who have kind of similar or different ideas allows us to be clearer ourselves. So I think speaking is a slight weakness. I think Chinese students are very good grammatically, so they understand grammar very well because of the way that they've been schooled, and that means that their writing is normally okay. It's decent. It's accurate, but not a lot of detail. So I think I would say speaking and writing are the two weaker of the skills. I don't think they're poor speakers. They just don't speak a lot. So I don't think speaking is necessarily a weakness. It seems to be almost like a cultural thing, or maybe a character thing, where unless I directly ask them, Zhaishi, what do you think? He won't respond. Do you know what I mean? So it's I don't think it's necessarily a weakness. It's just it's more of a character thing or a cultural thing. In a way, I think the way that a lot of my Chinese students have been taught English is they've been taught English at school to understand it as a second language, but mainly to pass an IELTS test. So they do, I think you mentioned cramming courses. So I think that they're taught how to write one particular style of essay, and that's to pass the IELTS. So when they come here to us, they can write kind of advantages, disadvantages types of essays. But if you give them a task that they've never done before, an essay type that they've never studied before, like an argument essay or a persuasive essay, they find it difficult to get started because they have had no experience. So yeah, I think ideally when we're teaching students how to write in a second language, it needs to be a longer process. Think about how you learned writing your first language. You couldn't do it in the summer over 3-4 weeks of cramming. It was something which you get better over time, and I think our students are pushed out of school into an IELTS and into England, and they don't really get that time to fully develop their written skills because they're taught to pass a test. They're not taught to write, if that makes sense. They're taught to write in a way that gets them the right result to go to university. And I think writing is a very, very big and wide genre. There's lots of different genres in written form, and I think we only teach, or they only learn maybe 1 or 2 before they come here. So they find it difficult to adapt sometimes. I speak Italian, I speak Spanish, and the reason I mention this is I didn't speak any Italian before I moved to Italy. And one of the things that I found really, really useful, and I know this sounds quite simplistic, but was just trying to watch my Italian TV with English subtitles. So it meant that I could enjoy the experience of watching the TV because I understood it, but it also meant that I was slowly teaching myself vocabulary by hearing a word in Italian and thinking, I wonder what that means, and then looking down and, okay, it's that word in English, and then it would stick in my head. So I built my vocabulary from doing things that I enjoy. So I think when we study languages in school, we get a language teaching book that the teacher gives us, and we read chapters that the teacher asks us to read, or we listen to exercises that the teacher asks us to do. And the book is written to teach language. But I think more natural language develops if you try to teach yourself using kind of real world activities, like simple things. As I said, I used to watch the news in Italian, and that's 30 minutes every night. I would leave the subtitles off and use that as a listening activity. Listening to music, trying to translate music, stuff like that. So I always think if you really want to develop your language at a higher level, there needs to be an element of naturalness. So it does not going and studying 1 hour a week in a language school, but trying to learn every day. So reading things, taking note of vocabulary, little listening exercises, listening to the radio in your second language. But I think a lot of our students, what they do is they study all day in English, so they're tired of using their second language, and when they go home, they switch back into their first language because it's easier for the brain, it's a bit more relaxing. Also, if you can, having friends. My friends basically taught me Italian. My girlfriend, who was Italian, taught me Italian, so I had a very good teacher. But I think if you move to a country like the UK, there's a lot of Chinese people here, and the temptation is to hang around only with Chinese people. Do you know what I mean? And then if you do that, you're speaking Chinese or you're speaking Mandarin all of the time. So you don't have those natural opportunities to learn from other people because you're all speaking the first same language. So yeah, in summary, try to do things in your second language that you enjoy. I enjoyed reading about football in Italian, listening to the radio in Italian, and using that as a language learning experience. But also make sure that you immerse yourself in the culture. Try to have friends who are of that nationality. So if I was living in China, I would be trying to hang around with Chinese people and learn from them. Whereas I think the temptation here is Chinese students come to the UK and then they find other Chinese people to live with and socialize with, which isn't a problem. It just means it reduces the amount of learning opportunities that they have in kind of everyday life. You could be shy and introverted and in your first language. So I'm English. If I'm shy and introverted, I might not speak a lot in English because I'm shy. So I don't always think that it's a language issue. I think it's a combination between the character that you have. Are you naturally quite bubbly? Are you naturally quite vivacious, lively? Or are you quite a shy, quiet person? And you can be shy and quiet in your first language. So there's an element of me which wishes that some of my students were more confident, but I can't teach confidence. Do you know what I mean? I can teach language. Confidence is something which people develop themselves. So what I would say is, I think a lot of the lack of confidence sometimes comes from people thinking, I don't want to speak in English because my English isn't very good. But I learned, if I'm honest, when I was in Italy, that making mistakes was the quickest way to learn. So I would be trying to speak in Italian with my basic Italian when I first got there, and whoever I was talking to would say, non ho capito, I don't understand. Puoi ripetere, can you repeat it? And that told me in my head, okay, I've made a mistake there somewhere. And then I would try to say, okay, like, what didn't you understand? How do I correct it? So from being confident and being happy to make mistakes, I learned more. Because if I don't speak, I don't learn that I'm making mistakes, and then I can't correct it. If I do speak and I make mistakes, okay, it might be a little bit embarrassing sometimes, but at least I've learned from that experience. So I would say, yeah, if it's the fact that you're worried about making mistakes, don't. We make mistakes in our first language. Do you know what I mean? So try to be as confident as you can with your second language, and remember that if you make mistakes, quite possibly someone will correct you, and then you won't make that mistake in future because you understand that it's wrong and you know how to correct it. So that would be my advice.